because the knot in the navel had been released, there was a fearlessness with which you were living. And then in the midst of that process of continuing to live life, experiment in life, learn about your life, you had also learned a lesson about how this fearlessness could brought you into perhaps dangerous territory or experiences or phenomena. And that was a lesson in and of itself. And then I was wondering about the matter of how this release from the knot in the navel related to your understanding of ego death.
Well, I think probably be more appropriate to say, because it is coined that way, and even Adidam spoke to that in many magazine articles and in the beginning. I think it's more of what is of death is of our illusion. It's not that there is an ego to begin. That's one of the liberating feelings that you get when you are released from this identity, the body, the world that you were existing in, is that it never was there to begin with. There's the humor. That's the joke. At least that's my feeling. The joke is it was never there to begin with. Right. Although what was there was the identity of name, address, telephone number, social security number, mother, father, daddy, friends, my car, your pencil, all of these social identities that were really embedded in the mind, in the identity of not just self but of other. Because as he speaks in those early identification, differentiation, and desire, as soon as that split of ego is created, if you will, there's a sense of self, there's a sense of other, and then there's a sense of world. The three primary identities, self, other, and world, are instantaneously formed. So all of that is a social fabrication, but it's a psychological. It's not just simple, like Timothy Leary would be going to Copenhagen in 1961, telling the psychologists there in Copenhagen that it's all a game and there's no ego to begin with. You know, no, that's not going to work, because it's deeper than just I only got it on the physical level or the lower mental level.
Okay, important note.
Right? I didn't have a sense of a higher dimensions of things, although it did bring me a sense of liberation in a kind of stratosphere. So up to 36,000 feet or whatever, you know, didn't jettison me into, you know, there were other experiences during that period of time, but with the light and the third eye and being dissolved, all of that stuff. But the fundamental understanding of no ego or ego death was basically, and I think this in the beginning, he really said he did not want to emphasize that release in the navel, because he said in the early teachings, it would bring people's attention to the body.
Right. Okay.
And he said he didn't want to do that. So he de-emphasized. He specifically said he de-emphasized that vital shock for him, or the release of the navel. He de-emphasized that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So again, you know, I really appreciate hearing you describe this, and then your development further and growing and learning in terms of discriminating in relationship to the experience, because now what you're describing is the discriminative intelligence that you became very acutely aware of, even when you described your first reception, you know, really profound reception, and even prior to coming into his physical company, of the intelligence that is not philosophically based, but the intelligence of the heart.
Yeah, and one of the things I would like to add to this conversation is that you, as I saw for myself, is that anything I attached to immediately brought in its opposite. And
Yeah.
anytime I was trapped in a thought or a conception or an understanding, I realized that that was a double bind. I was continually, if I reached out or tried to work with the mind or get cosmic or philosophical, whatever, I always saw that that was a trap, and I was stuck for many many years in that double-edged sword where the double bind was paramount.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it was almost hellish in a lot of ways. There was liberation, but there was an extremely an enormous amount of tapas that went
Yes.
along. That included madness. It included ecstasies of God realization, whatever. But as a Buddhist, not being that kind of God oriented, it didn't get me into Jesus too much.
Mm.
But yeah, though it wasn't like Ali Ali home for you, although it was in a lot of ways. It only initiated. That's why I say it's the beginning, or he says it's the beginning of the real process.
Mm. And so at that point in time, you also would not have been aware of the manner in which that the divine grace that is always present in relationship to everyone and everything is active. And I mean, and was active even, of course, prior to Adidam's incarnation, because he had a unique function in this seeming late time as this universe is manifesting, apparently, but not unreal. Love those paradoxes. You would not have been aware of the descent process that he specifically describes in terms of the navel being penetrated.
What was descent? What was descent was the fullness of the belly, the fullness of the vital.
Yes.
I was a very strong person. I was a very vital. I mean, I could use that vital energy. So there was an extent. I was not totally aware as of them now of the spinal line.
Sure.
I was not aware of that. Only later through meditation did I realize the spinal aspect of this conductivity. It was only the descent, and it really didn't have a descent because it was just full. I really,
at that point.
So it was still connected very much with the first, second, and third stages of primary identity and energy. But what was alive was the conductivity, was the energy. But I didn't understand it as that. The heart was open and feeling that. But the sense of pressure on the head, pressure on the descent, the fullness of the navel, and then the out breath going up the back, which is now, probably the more of an emphasis now. It's 77 years old. It's not the descent as much as the ascent. So, yeah. So in the beginning, it didn't have that. It was the conductivity was fully on the, as you say, the descent, but it was just filling the belly, filling the navel, and using sexual energy, because then that brought in a lot of sexual energy too. So then, I was alive in that dimension. And so,
did you do much experimentation in that regard then, and study much about the yoga of sexuality and in technical terms? No.
no, I just I learned more of my sexuality from women than with anything else.
Right.
Just dealing, but probably one of the more deepest senses that I really became aware of is because I'm now wanting to blend. I want to blend in. With a woman, I want to blend. I want to be inside the woman. I want to be inside. I want to go. And I realized that you could never be inside another person.
Right. Okay.
You were always bodily and psychically. You only had the reflective mechanism of the mind. You only had the reflective. You could never be another person. You could never penetrate to be as the other person was.
Mm.
You could never merge to be one. You could merge and feel in a certain feeling sense, but I could never enter your mind. I could never, I mean, I know you could read people and whatever emotionally, but there's a very subtle, this is where I really came to be understanding what Adidam speaks of. This is a reflective mechanism. That you're in a hologram, you're in a hallucination. You're not really in another world. You're in one world, but this one world is your perception. It's not. You could never penetrate another person's mind or world or other. I could never be inside another person. I could never be inside that other person. That's my limitation, but that's been confirmed for me over and over again. And that's why I have my understanding now is that this is truly a hallucination. This is a hologram. I'm in a hologram. And this is a reflective, the world is a reflective mechanism. Yes, there is you out there, and there's a car, and there's a tree, but fundamentally, that is being it's a perceptual phenomenon. It's a subjective phenomenon primarily.
Right.
It's not objective. It's all subjective, even though most ardent science and math and science has now come to that in the 30s, but they still haven't got it. They're still practicing the objective world. But this is another element to understanding that I slowly understood that we are, and I don't mean it to be isolating island kind of thing, but there is the hallucination. This is a hallucination.
So this, I actually haven't heard anyone speak about this specifically in this regard. So this is an interesting aspect of your process. And what you seem to be indicating that this is something that continues, or have you come to a greater understanding in relationship to what you just described?
No, I don't know. Well, no, it's only been confirmed again and again. And I really, so what it does, it gives me, I understand the limitations. That one is the psychobiography of the body and the world, and everybody is up against. And I also understand that you or anybody in the world that I work or deal with my wife or my partner, or whoever, they cannot penetrate. I can never ask them to come into me so there's this play that we have as self and other and relationships and intimacy. And, there's a certain place that I cannot go into you and you cannot come into me. I'm responsible for as much as I can feel and be with you in your feeling on a certain level, on the emotional level. So I'm speaking in a psychic kind of a deeper sense of connection. unity, of oneness.
Right. Okay. So I often will hear you use the term "we're splitting hairs"
Yes,
here. Okay, so but not that paradox or the splitting of the hairs is pointing to something that is significant in terms of our ability to understand the nature of nature or the condition within which we are arising. And
right. You're hitting a point right in the head of the argument of ideas and understanding of anything. Is that because this is where the fights are, this is where the wars are. We can agree at a 30-yard line, we can agree at a 20-yard line, we can agree at a 10-yard. But when you get down to the Madhyamaka, when you get down to the philosophical and the is and the not is and this and that and the splitting of the hair, you can never get a complete this is what he calls perfect knowledge, in the sense is that you cannot get two, as long as there is two, both two have to become individual one. You can never merge the two to perfect unity. You're already in unity.
the prior condition.
The prior unity is already there, and you start to enter into any kind of agreement or self and other or male, female, or up and down or moon, sun, these two, as long as it's in a conditional world, mind or body, or feeling or excitement, they're never gonna come together. It's only in the because they're priorly. It's only in the transcendence.
Yes. Okay.
Of these two that they become one.
Yeah.
And then there is a recognition. It's only in the recognition.
Yes. Yes. So this conversation, these last few minutes or so, is this understanding, and then how to comprehend either verbally or communicating through writing, to describe an experience. All of this occurs in through the mechanism of attention, and attention being an extension, if it is an extension of the act of the ego that creates the two.
This is why it's causal. Because it's not, you can't work this out.
Yeah.
And this is where the surrender is not your surrender. Because once the process starts, this is all great. You have no planets.
Yeah.
The
ground upon which you stand.
You are.
Surrender happens.
Exactly.
You participate in that. You volunteer for that. And that is
you really have no choice. You don't you don't even have a choice anymore.
Yeah. And that's because of what has been revealed and the lessons that you have received and taken responsibility for. There is this understanding that it goes beyond experiential aspects of the psychobiography and of the ego and the mechanism of the body mind, and meaning body mind, and also the philosophical aspects of cognizing it. Then you enter into, there's the spiritual process, but there's transcendental spiritual. There's spiritual, and then there's transcendental, but then there's transcendental spiritual, which is the uniqueness of Adidam's revelation in relationship to what ego death is and what identity is.
And that's why he is so incredibly, I don't know what the world would do. We would be in really tough place without his wisdom and what his incarnation is about. Because nowhere does this get fully revealed. And it is only in your own process that his revelation become apparent. This is
Yes.
you're entering into his
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
his place. This is not.
Yes. And this, even through language, as he indicates, there's always a limit. So that's why language is merely an art form. Even any manifestation that we recognize as a modification or permutation of unqualified light can only serve as a threshold form.
And this is what got me into Korbisky through Watts. It got me into neurolinguistics. It got me into Wittgenstein, because this is where philosophy has gotten into language. And then,
Right.
and so if you want to study the traditions, you see the limitations of language, or what the form of language is, and what the limits of language, and you see what what's their understanding of it. And then you got neurolinguistics, and you got Wittgenstein, who's the epitome of, that school of language being the basis of reality. You can see the limits of what the world has come up with. They're approaching, they're getting closer. But and this is where Adidam's revelation surpasses or illuminates.
Illuminates, yes. And not negates.
No.
No dissociation, no lack of respect, no acknowledgement of certain necessities that reveal the nature of the divine process in its full spectrum of
Because
possibilities, but also the transcendence of all those possibilities.
a lot of the search, as he's pointing to, has a noble quality to it, has a kind of transcendental quality to it. It's a heart matter for people who are really investigating, whether it's the divinity and Christ, Buddha, Allah, philosophy, depth psychology, art, beauty, music. I mean, there is an authentic search, if you will, for beauty, for truth, for bliss. There is that. And there are elements to beauty that is illuminating. There's beauty in nature, there's beauty in life. And it does illuminate the heart and brings people together, and understanding that the life in nature is at a critical juncture, and we're doing terrible things to Mother Earth. So nothing is negated, but to have that not to his peace is different than what the basis of struggling to make peace.
Two trying to be one.
Well, see, this is the criticism he had with Carolyn and what's his name, when they were bringing to his peace to the table of these people who, when they got into the room, they could speak together pretty well for 2 or 3 days. But then as the days got more intense and the narrowing down of the differences started to become intensified, because when you start to eliminate, you're going to also illuminate the differences. So we can agree at this. But when we're getting down to those 2 places, it's only in, as we said, the transcendence of that.
Right. Well, and that's where the demonstration is the responsible capability for the demonstration of that is what will enable the cooperation plus tolerance equals peace. And although Adidam indicates that can be embraced at a fundamental human level, it's not an enlightened person he's speaking to. He's speaking to everyone.
Yeah, because that's the nature. It's the prior unity. It's prior unity. It's not like you got to make us whole.
Yeah,
You're-
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it's also then not waiting for some kind of magic to happen from an other to cause you to be capable of that.
All at once.
It's actually it's a humanly mature responsibility. And that does correspond to not being undone through the freeing of energy and attention, through listening. And one thing about what I hear you describing too, and this is not uncommon, again, speaking of the superphysics of the process, is that, and this is what I can confess in my own ordeal over decades of this direct relationship with Adidam, and entirely in relationship to the world and to the great tradition as a whole in various aspects, and particularly through study and in relationship to people who have differing processes and practices, is that listening, hearing, and seeing is a perpetual process. That's the eternal conversation. It's not like you progress from listening and then to hearing and then to seeing and then to the perfect practice. It's all the inherent process that is perpetually occurring in the context of the bright.
It magnifies itself. That's all it's doing. It's magnifying itself.
Yeah.
That's all it is. You see continually, not just hour by hour, not just by minute, not by second, it's by breath, but even in between the breaths and in the, it's just.
Yeah. That's the prior to attention, where attention is resolved in its source. And that's the satsang, that's Adidam's transmission. And that's where it's that transmission, that blessing grace, where the process occurs.
And when you really get it, you get caught in just attention. And that's the real double bind.
Yes.
And that's where he even, well, he says he gets to a place where there's
jumping off place.
Well, it's not even that. He says you only have two choices: complete peace or suicide. I mean, he does say those things.
No, I know. Believe me, I'm a very, very. That distinction was initiated in 1986.
If you recognize that, then you know that's the place that you have to be in to be purified. So there's a grace that you're priorly aware of, no matter what crisis you're in or whatever you're in.
Yeah.
Without that free.
Yeah. And then synchronous with that is that while you may have assumed that all of the patterns that you have assumed to be the I, that you are identifying via the identification, differentiation, and desire, gross, subtle, and causal, any words that you may want to use, is that you think, oh, I've completely transcended. I'm no longer identified with any aspect of my infantile personality. And then lo and behold, life presents itself with a conjunction that smacks you in the face, in the heart, in the navel, in the genitals, wherever it does. And immediately, if you can observe, understand, and stay steadfast in the fidelity to the bright reality truth as Adidam transmits it, as Satguru Yoga, Satguru Siddha Yoga, then that's where the release occurs of identification. And it's not as though, okay, done and dusted with that part of the psychophysical being. That's the difference between the great path of return and Adidam's process of being established in the source condition, not as that which is to be felt towards or sought, but the recognition that is the always already condition of everyone and everything. So the mission of not to, can only be, you can only exercise that in the context of a space where beings are able and willing to be free enough and open enough to release the conceptions of that which indicates duality.
Right.
Yeah. That takes a brave heart and a passionate heart.
Well, this is the subtle nature of this process, and this is why sadhana is so essential. It's not just an understanding or a good LSD trip. or whatever. It
Right.
is
Or a great sexual experience. I mean,
exactly.
it goes through every chakra, so to speak, must be penetrated and the illusion understood. But different beings will have more energies of associated grasping towards or seeking in relationship to, and that's why it unfolds so spontaneously and uniquely. And then artfully must be, the process then becomes an artful process, which Adidam describes. To understand the process and in him, you must understand him as an artist.
Yeah.
I can confirm that, and perpetual experience of that as he even is no longer physically alive, because all of those art forms, are the treasures. They're the means of a passageway, of access. And no one should be denied that access.
Well, in truth, nobody is.
No, not in truth, not in truth. However, in terms of what he manifested as the treasures, that
Right.
are real. No, you can call it a hallucination, but what
Yeah.
it is not unreal.
Right.
That
Right.
entity is
Exactly. And
not
that's the big
Yeah,
distinction. And there is still the process. There is still his
yeah,
his treasures, and
yeah,
that's what he was calling everybody to.
yes.
You know.
Otherwise, you're creating a way or a process based on a psychosis of revisions, as if we don't exist, as well, what you were also talking about earlier. Do whatever the fuck you want. Oh, excuse my language.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So perhaps we're getting close to a good amount of time, you reckon?
Mhm.
Yeah. Hmm. So yes, and I can refer back again to that little bit that you wrote, and I'll put a link with what we have spoken about here, because there are also more subtle nuances to what you communicated there that I'd like to go into the next time that we speak.
Okay. Well, I've enjoyed the conversation, and I appreciate your asking me to be with you for this time.
Yeah, and for anyone who's listening, thank you, and I hope this is of service in your divine process. Yeah,
All right. Much love to you.
you too. Thank you.
The only way to pass through the principal mood is to go directly to the heart and not waste any time bullshitting in fear. Now, of course, in practice, there will be a certain amount of theater in everybody's case, and perhaps in most people's cases there'll be lots of cycles and phases and insights and so forth. But the process I'm describing is instant, direct, present. And it's just as much a matter of a penetration of a moment of fear as it is a penetration of any ordinary thought. Sheer terror coming out of the unconscious is no weightier an object than the simplest reverie or thought. The process I'm talking about is a process in consciousness in which you see the present event of your existence as this contraction and know what just precedes it. In every moment in which that occurs, there is a natural falling out of the binding limitation that you are compulsively creating into an unnameable sense of existence. That is the natural state. It is the intuition of the heart whenever it occurs. It is simply that when a life becomes founded in that intuition, that intuitive consciousness comes to the front of that life and begins to work upon all the events of life most directly.